Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are joining and logging in from today. And welcome to today's webinar. First, I want to thank Rita and the Arena team who made the arrangements for this platform and our discussion today. I'm Ellen Weiss from PCM Trials in a new capacity as Emeritus Strategist, and I'll be hosting this webinar today. And it is my very great pleasure to have Craig Lipset and Deb Guattari with us today, who will join me in a discussion we have titled The Past, Present, and Future of Mobile Visits in Decentralized Clinical Trials. Before we get going, I do have a few items of housekeeping to share with you before we start. First of all, thank you for being here, and please send us your questions throughout the webinar. We will allocate some time at the end of the session to address any questions or thoughts you may have. If your question does not get answered today, it will be available to be answered by the assemblage here today at a later time. And for any related content on the webinar, please click on the widget shown on your screen. Should you have any tech issues, and we certainly hope not, please click on the help icon and the Arena team is standing by. And without further ado, please allow me to welcome our speakers and people I hold in great esteem. Deb, why don't we begin with you, ladies first?
Hi, thank you so much, Ellen. I'm very delighted to be here this morning. My name is Deb Guattari. I have most recently been at Pfizer working for the last 8 years or so in their clinical trial operations and quality department. I got involved in decentralized trials before it was in vogue, before the pandemic hit us, and as a nurse actually performed home visits before it became something to do during clinical trials. So I'm very excited to be here today and talk with you all about the use of mobile visits. Thank you.
And following Deb, the man who needs little to no introduction, the Dean of DCT, who's been with us from the beginning in this long journey. Craig, welcome.
Ellen, I don't know what a Dean of DCT is, but I will say I look forward to having the word emeritus in my job title and work description. So congratulations to you on that milestone. And I look forward to seeing how that's going for you at Scope. It's a pleasure to be here with you and Deb. For those I haven't met in the audience, my name is Craig Lipset. I serve as co-chair for the Decentralized Trials Research Alliance, which is a nonprofit collaboration of pharma and tech and service providers and academics and government agencies and patient groups all working together through a nonprofit collaboration to ease the global adoption of decentralized research. And we've been thrilled to include PCM Trials as a member since our earliest days. I also serve on the faculty at Rutgers University as an adjunct assistant professor, where I teach a course in their clinical research management program, and have a few other places where I get to spend time either as a board member or an advisor through a group that I lead called Clinical Innovation Partners. It is such a pleasure to be with you here today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you. PCM put a discussion like this one, and indeed this one specifically, together because we do believe that live discussion of perspectives on DCT and the application of home visits is an important piece, because Craig, Deb, you and I have attended many conferences where we hear panelists up on the stage discuss their innovative, first of its kind pilot. We heard the word pilot a lot for a very long time. They were going to jump in to DCT and home visits. And I think the experience around this virtual table is that they're a little bit late. It's been going on for about 20 years. Indeed, the very first home visit happened in 2003. So we can take the mobile visit to a bar this year, turning 21. How exciting. We truly hope and feel at PCM that home visits are a fully mature offering. And PCM has led the way for quite a long time. We've been in this since 2008. We work across 81 countries, and in our 16 years, we've really seen a lot of evolution and improvement, and the scalability of this thing has arrived. So in the space that we work, it's across hundreds of sponsors, many hundreds of studies and protocols. So let's dive in from this place where we know around this table what DCT is forming into. It's an evolving definition for sure, but from our experience, and if you add up the years of experience of the three of us here, it's quite a long time. And I know we have a lot to offer those who are working in the space now and those who will come in the future. So I thought, let's look back into the past. And for each of you, what was your entry point into this patient accommodation that is DCT? Craig, can you start us off? Because I know you have the origin stories and aha moments for yourself to talk about here. And then Deb, I'd like your perspectives as well.
Thanks, Ellen. So way back in 2009, I was relatively green at Pfizer. I had only been there for maybe about a year. And my job title didn't have the word innovation and certainly didn't have the word decentralized in it. I worked in a function around precision medicine. But my journey outside of Pfizer was one of a patient with a rare pulmonary disease called pulmonary sarcoidosis. And that journey led me down this path of embedding and really understanding the e-patient community. And I remember I had a coffee with a friend named Dave DeBronkart, known as e-patient Dave. He kind of diagnosed me as an e-patient. And it really helped me to appreciate this movement of empowered patients leveraging technology, understanding their health data, becoming partners in shared decision making with their providers. And so I had this one life on one side of me as a patient going through this journey, being hungry to access my data and to learn and understand and participate. And on the other hand, I was working in clinical research and clinical trials already for a number of years. And so to me, this opportunity to bring these worlds together is where I started to put focus on what we now call decentralized trials. We had a very awkward name for it back in 2009 of a participatory, patient-centered clinical trial. But whatever the jargon, the concept was the same. We knew back then that we weren't inventing anything new. We were just looking to put together pieces that already existed, just like you called out. Home visits had already been existing. Electronic diaries, ePro, had already existed. So many of the components had already existed. Could we just put these together in ways that created more flexibility for patients to be able to participate outside of a research site? We also appreciated at the time that there was so much we were already centralizing in healthcare. We were centralizing IRBs, EKG review, image review, labs. And so we appreciated this was sort of a page from Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovator's Prescription. We appreciated this theme that the more you could centralize specialized services, the more you could then distribute and decentralize access to care. And we felt we could do the same with clinical trials. Could we even centralize some of the functions of the investigator and coordinators and enable more distributed access? And so that was sort of the origin story and eye-opening for me back in 2009 that led us down this path with the Pfizer remote trial that we announced publicly in 2011, which was the first clinical trial under an IND that was using, at the time, a fully decentralized approach. That trial terminated early. There were a lot of things that worked and there were a lot of things that didn't. We failed to enroll in adequate numbers the people that we were looking for that met the eligibility criteria for a registration trial. a lot of things did work along the way, but our patient engagement and recruitment strategies didn't. And so that's been the foundation for me in this space. And that's, I guess, for me, a little bit of that origin story.
Well, thank you. Deb, you come to it as a nurse, first and foremost. I know that that's probably the proudest comma set of letters after your name, because it's a vocation and it's a mission with you. Can you describe how you came to this? Because I know it was maybe before clinical, but in standard of care work, and how you evolved that observation to being transformative at a major company.
Sure. Thank you, Ellen. And that was great input, Craig. Thank you. So when I went to nursing school way back in the day, I graduated and went on to work in the pediatric hematology oncology space. Many of our patients there needed to be on total parenteral nutrition, TPN, at night, or needed to have some type of NG tube feeding at night. And really, that was the only thing keeping these families in the hospital, was the ability to infuse or provide some type of formula to the patient via a gastric tube or something. And otherwise, during the day, they were free to run around and play. And so some of the nurses that I worked with came up with a plan to transfer those patients to be able to do that at home. That was my first eye-opening experience with working standard of care patients at home who had some type of oncological or hematological disorder, and the joy that it brought to these patients' lives, the whole family, because they weren't stuck at the hospital, was immense, and really made a huge difference for their quality of life as well. As time went on, I became more involved in clinical research, and practiced clinical research in the hospital setting, but then moved to industry and thought, sometimes we could be doing some of these things in the home setting that would be safe, and we could still collect integral data as listed by the protocol, and be able to give patients more flexibility and quality of life. So I took a position at Pfizer working with the decentralized innovations team there. I'm not sure what they're calling it these days. But the whole mission really was to bring about the elements that are discussed in the FDA and EMA guidance documents on decentralized trials. How can we bring that about to give patients more flexibility, bring in more diversity, and still meet ICH GCP guidelines and the protocol? And that is when I met Ellen and her team. The very first day, I had been at Pfizer for quite some time, but my very first day in that role was when I met Ellen and her team. And we put together a plan to bring home nursing for one of the trials. And we've been working together ever since for the last 4 years. And I think that we have spread lots of good stuff all over the globe.
Well, thank you. And in our experience here at PCM, and certainly my own, I've been in and around home visits. This is year 10. So pre-pandemic time and post-pandemic time are kind of how my professional experience in this was divided. And certainly I appreciate hearing where all of us were working sort of independently, either lifting within our company, or Craig, you lifting within an industry to say, hey, raising your hand to say there's a better way. And I see this technology and I see this service offering, but how do we bring it all together? What will be the unifying glue that's going to allow everyone to imagine this for their own work. And what presented itself, of course, it's in our past. Should we optimistically say? Is I'm going to ask you from this lens: what was the first time you saw actual traction about DCT being actively used and quote unquote baked in to the trial environment? For myself, and this matches up with you, Deb, is I was present in many, many sponsors. I traveled like a demon everywhere that I could to evangelize and share, hey, this is what a remote visit, a mobile visit, a home healthcare visit can do. These are all the things within the lexicon of possibility. Can we talk about it? And many well-meaning people would say yes, nod politely and say, but it's expensive and we don't think you can scale it. And it's a contingent only thing. So we'll call you when we need you. Well, that We Need You Day was March 13th of 2020. And to share a little context with our audience, PCM has been in this space for a very long time, since 2008. And I'm a very busy person, and a busy year for me, let's take 2019, I entertained and responded to 72 RFPs. In 2020, that number rose to 881. I think we can clearly say they got the memo. But then it became a matter of what can and should be served. So as we look to that past, let's think spring of 2020, ring a bell with anyone with the pandemic? Was that the first time you saw real traction around everyone kind of singing from the same songbook of, we have to find a way to do this, now let's roll up our sleeves and do it? Deb, we collaborated on probably the fastest moving pandemic work that could ever have been imagined, and it was successful. Can you describe that time from your viewpoint? And then Craig, I'd like your thoughts, because you were outside that sponsor loop. What did you see in that time frame? But I'll begin with Deb and a trip to the Wayback Machine.
Well, getting together with PCM Trials as our service provider to be able to provide mobile visits globally for a global trial that was moving extremely quickly. Of course, it had to do with treating patients that had COVID, and within the protocol, it was allowed, if not encouraged, right? We didn't want people with COVID out walking the streets to get to site, taking the bus or train to get to site. These people had COVID, and at that time, we had no idea still how to treat it. People were dying in the hundreds of thousands, and I do not make light of that. I think these clinical trials from many sponsors, along with our medical partners, really made the difference and turned the globe around for being able to treat this disease. In any event, we decided to put a nursing team together in every country to be able to address every patient at every site who said, yes, I would like to have nursing visits done at home. I don't feel well. I think that's sometimes overlooked by people in industry that may not be in the clinical group. People felt like yuck when they had COVID. They didn't want to get out. They had fever. They had the bad sore throat. They had GI symptoms. It was easier for them if the nurse could come to their house, if it was something that they were comfortable with. There still is, and there were a lot of PIs that still had their heels dug in the ground and said, no, I want my patient to come to site. And I would say, oh, but Dr. So-and-so, we're being told from our governments globally, stay home, especially if you are sick, stay home. We don't want to expose others. But certain sites and PIs just were not yet open to that idea. Over the course of the next 2 to 3 years, where we are now, that has definitely changed. People have got the memo, as Ellen said. People, not only for COVID, but for other types of clinical trials as well, see the advantages from the patient's perspective, to be able to volunteer to have mobile visits in their home and not have to go to site. And also, Ellen brought up about cost. I will say that I've been to many conferences in the last 3 years. Value versus cost. Mm-hmm. To me, it's the value that we are giving to these patients and the data we're collecting and the safety that we're providing them with, as opposed to how much did this cost? So a little bit different view from my perspective, but that's because I'm a nurse at heart, and I really believe that, patient point of view and patient voice is important. So that's where we are. That's where I'm thinking currently today.
So I'm going to build on that a bit. And Ellen, you were asking about sort of that, when did we see meaningful adoption with research sponsors? Certainly during the pandemic, we saw chaotic, frenetic adoption, right? A mad scramble to try to maintain continuity, to make sure that patients could continue to access investigational product, that we could continue to collect data that was needed for efficacy and safety. But I would say it was probably about the end of 2021, by the time we really started to see normalization of processes, that organizations had looked at their SOPs, looked at their training, looked at the vendors that they had supporting them, right? So what do I mean by that? Make sure I don't have contradictory statements in my SOPs that assumed that everything would take place from home. Make sure that my training for my staff complements these approaches, and make sure that when I look at the decentralized methods that my portfolio would need going forward, do I have the right partners and vendors available to me, so that I can start to normalize this, because the technology isn't straightforward. There have been a lot of bumps in the road with sponsors implementing tech, and home health and visiting nurses can be intimidating for many. I'm relying on humans going out into communities and having these one-on-one interactions in the very intimate settings of people's homes. How do I have operational trust and confidence? And with both tech and services, how do I bring my investigators along? And so I think our adoption kind of went through this kind of spike of urgency in 2020, and then into this stage of continuing to adopt, but refocusing on stabilizing with norms and processes, relying on folks with titles like standards and process lead for decentralized to help create that normalization. But now we're entering a different time, right? The economy is tough. Reimbursement challenges are a challenge for pharma ahead. Biotech companies are struggling for financing to get that next study started. And so there are a lot of challenges that are fresh and new facing pharma and biotech sponsors just to maintain progress, not just with DCT, but anything innovative in their trials right now, or for some, just to get any trials up and running right now. I think about that Gartner hype cycle, and for those that aren't familiar with it, in the hype cycle, you have this peak of inflated expectations with any new innovation or technology, and then it sort of drops into this trough of disillusionment. But then those approaches rise back up through a slope of enlightenment. And I think with decentralized, we had a very quick peak of inflated inflated expectations, but now we're in this trough where it's the hard work, the tourists have left, the people that just sort of, and Ellen, you saw who the tourists were, right? At Scope or DIA, how many booths popped up that just said decentralized and home, and you're like, my booth has said this for 20 years. Like, who are these people? Well, now this year, all those booths say AI instead of decentralized because, they've left. But you know what? The people that are focused on making these models work are still here and committed to making it work because that's what the patients in our trials need and deserve. And so that's how we get out of that kind of trough that we're in right now. Getting the hard work done, making implementation work, and sharing the evidence of what's working through collaborations and other spaces so that we can raise all of those boats.
Well said.
That's excellent. Oh, I'm sorry, Ellen. I just have to add, Craig, that, one of the things that I was asked to do with a team of people at my former employer, Pfizer, was to come back and figure out what is this actually costing us. The team spent over 3 years trying to figure out a way to figure out exactly what the cost to this trial was. And I think that we had some guesstimate idea, but truly, again, what you're saying is very important for today's world because the economy has changed. And I don't want to see the focus of, this is not a value add financially, so we're not going to do this going forward. I think the thought process has to be, this is a value add to the global community, and I know many sponsors who feel that way. And so let's keep trying. Don't give up, even if we don't have an exact financial dollar on home health, mobile visits, all of the different things that are under the DCT umbrella.
Deb, I think folks have to keep in mind that there are multiple reasons why we should be decentralizing right now. And the first are all those patient factors that we put first, as we should. Patient factors around experience and access, patient factors around representation and diversity. And I think that's where people lean in and say, well, what was the ROI? How much did I spend? What did I get back? But I think that is a little short-sighted in that there's a second reason to decentralize, which is business continuity, right? That's the reason that we saw the spike in adoption in 2020. It wasn't that industry suddenly had this epiphany that people were struggling to access trials and that we lacked representation. The reason we saw the spike in activity was because clinical trials were placed in jeopardy. And that jeopardy did not go away in 2022. We continue to face the risk of the next pandemic. We know that war in parts of the world does stand in the way, and conflict stands in the way of patients being able to consistently get to sites. Weather events and other factors will continue to jeopardize and place a threat over clinical trials that are running for 2, 3, 5 years, always being able to make sure that a participant can get to a site. And so that's a sort of second reason. And I think we're seeing a third reason coming out of Europe right now, which is leaned in around the environmental impact of clinical research. And what is the carbon impact of a clinical trial, and how can we take measures to mitigate that? When we're looking at the ROI, we have to consider a range of different factors here. And I know that the folks at Tufts did their work looking at net present value, and I think that probably may swing a little hard in terms of a business case that resonates with R&D leaders, because that sort of hits on the commercial value of the molecule. And to me in R&D, this is just a cost, right? I don't get revenue. That's someone else's business inside of my company. But there's something in between here, as you're hitting on, that really can help to tell that story of what's the value, the return. And it's more than just how many dollars did I spend and how many people of color did I enroll.
I agree. And I think that's an excellent segue to our present, which I guess, let me share from my perspective what I'm defining as present. We have had agencies around the world and regulators offer us guidance. No firm rules, but we have EMA guidance that drops always right before Christmas, before they run away for the holidays. We have preliminary guidance coming in with suggestions. And what I'm discerning in the digestion of these documents is that there is now a baseline of understanding that accommodation through remote visits, home health care exists. It's firmly baked in now to people's conscious. But again, finding the value, finding all of the permission really for a company to invest, and it truly is an investment they are making. But from my point of view, because I have been doing this for so very long, almost as long as it has existed, is to say we are reaching more women who were completely cut out of this for forever and a day. And we won't solve the really big degenerative diseases until we can pull in patients from their earliest diagnosis and then pulling them through research all the way to the end. And I'm referencing work that has been done in Alzheimer's, in dementias. It's great that we see progress and we see trials maybe 2/3 of the way down the path of Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. But until we can serve those patients with dignity and privacy at the earliest stages of that disease, because I've yet to meet anybody that, could imagine saying, there's a lot of Alzheimer's in my family, boss, and I think I'm going to enroll in this trial because they're telling me I'm probably headed that way. So I need every other Thursday off for the next 6 years. But by all means, promote me, give me tenure, hire me as a valued employee. The remote site visit or the home visit allows patients the dignity and privacy to manage their disease and embracing it on their terms and at the pace their dignity allows. And I've always felt very strongly about that. It's not been part of the value proposition that's in the discussion, and maybe it will from now onward. But this does bring us to the present. And you both have unique perspectives on the uptake of DCT. Craig, you and your organizations were pivotal in bringing all of the players together. Certainly when Deb and I were building a solution set on the fly, I believe we launched that COVID treatment trial in an astounding 13 days. But that was bringing in vendors that your company had not worked with in the past, but that I had learned about through some of your events, Craig, referencing things like Tasso and other monovalent devices, new technologies. It all came together because we knew each other. So thank you for providing that platform in the past. And now that we're in the present, let's make use of our connections, our library of experience, and ask ourselves, maybe we'll start with this table, what are your impressions of the uptake of DCT today? And are you encouraged or concerned by regulators' published guidance? And I think I'll start with you, Craig, because you're probably like me waiting on that EMA site in December to log on.
This industry needs clarity from regulators. Yes. There was a lot of perception, not necessarily reality, but perception that during the pandemic, when regulators around the world issued guidance on running trials during the pandemic, that somehow they lowered the bar in terms of accepting certain methods and approaches, which is nonsense. The same guardrails of patient safety and data integrity were immovable, right? And so there was a perception that there was increased permission from regulators, and that perception then extended that when the pandemic receded, that regulators would withdraw their friendliness and receptivity to these new approaches. And so it was very important that within such a short time after the FDA made clear that pandemic provisions are now no longer needed, that very soon after that, they released their DCT draft guidance that was deliberately timed by them to make clear that the FDA continues to support these methods and approaches. Likewise, the recommendations from EMA. Our industry needs those. Now, the EMA recommendations, there was a great session held for the Americans. Unfortunately, it was over Thanksgiving, but in Europe, where, there was a very honest conversation with the authorities around those recommendations. And quite frankly, that some of it swings a little hard in terms of positioning that decentralized trials are somehow different from a conventional trial, and not looking at it through the lens that, the FDA uses right early in their opening of their guidance, that decentralized trials are clinical trials. They just happen to use certain decentralized tools and methods in order to get the work done. And so we shouldn't be looking at decentralized as radically different, some radical departure that needs all sorts of additional explanations and protocols above and beyond what we might otherwise. And we shouldn't assume a default position that the traditional conventional approaches are somehow preferred and the gold standard for patients or other stakeholders. Now, a couple of quick notes. The European recommendations, though, do lean heavy on the need for giving investigators proper tools for oversight, whether because there's a connected health device or because there's a visiting nurse, and that's a good thing, right? That's an important call that investigators were looking for, and I think that's warranted. There's other provisions in the FDA's draft guidance that I think are great highlights around roles for healthcare providers in the community, but the FDA did receive close to 900 comments when their comment period was open. So expect that there'll be some clarity in the final version, but it will stay true to some of the opportunities that the FDA created, including that role of healthcare providers being able to perform routine care activities in the context of a clinical trial without being an investigator or sub-I.
Very interesting perspective on that. I have found over the last months a surprising attitude in myself, which is, I remember when this was every trial that was approached was all new processes, whatever. There are so many best practices we can apply from one paradigm to another, one study dying to another. And yet we still continue to innovate because the technologies just get better and better. Our ability in CredoQ development, astounding. Where was this when we needed to move vaccines? The technology gets better, smaller, more efficient, I think far more cost efficient than it ever was. So that algorithm of getting the right stuff in the right hands at the right place at the right time is becoming more familiar to everyone. And part of that relies on people applying the past through the present and jumping into the future. Deb, do you have any thoughts on?
I do. I just want to pick up on a couple points that both you and Craig brought out. So, I think when we're looking at, yes, the big regulatory bodies of the EMA and the FDA have put out draft guidance. However, all parts of the globe, Australia, Africa, South America, they are also waiting to see what these bigger heavy hitters are actually able to push through and get it approved. So I think it's important to recognize that although we speak of these large regulatory bodies, there are regulatory bodies globally that are looking to see how are we going to be able to provide decentralized clinical trial home visits or other elements to patients so that they can participate in clinical trials. It's not easy to participate in clinical trials. You heard Ellen make her point about the Alzheimer potential patient that needs every Thursday off. We have patients that say, very pertinent today in Israel, lots of hemophilia patients that are currently serving in the military guard there and participating in clinical trials. How do we keep that moving and not give them that opportunity to potentially improve their lives? I think that is really, really important to remember, is that it isn't just those two. It really is a global community. The other point I wanted to make is that although these guidances are there, ICH GCP is still our bedrock, right? So when it comes to building a protocol, carrying it out, making sure the patient safety is there, making sure the data is integral and is analyzed appropriately, we still need to turn back and look at what does ICH GCP have to say and where are they growing and how do we grow with them to ensure quality by design, building these decentralized elements into the protocol as we're thinking about the protocol. So when a clinician and team are looking across at that big grid of visits and what needs to be done at the protocol, what about if we thought, oh, well, let's really take a look at day 16 and is this really necessary?
Sure.
Is this something that can be done off-site? Is this something that is safe to do off-site at a mobile visit? Oh, yeah, well, maybe it is. I mean, just in these 3 years alone, we've gone from not having radiologic ability in the home to being able to have normal x-rays, just your plain flat plate chest x-ray, something like that, being mobile to the home. My joke always is, what are they going to shrink that MRI machine so we can bring that in our backpack into the patient's home so they don't have to go to site for that?
Good point. I think another present day, something that's absorbing my attention, is I guess the most polite way to put it, is when I read deeply into this, especially the EMA's latest utterances, what I'm seeing is, okay, we're going to offer in rare and orphan disease, which has always been a great use of DCT. It's probably the very first studies began there, and I think they'll always be there, that are best handled at home where a patient doesn't have to leave the home. Even going across town is a burden. So that more and more of those regulators are saying, and don't just go to the same 5 countries that you've always gone to, France, Germany, Spain, the UK, Italy. We want you to go further to the edges. We want you to go to the smaller countries that often aren't asked to participate in trials. And that if you want all of the advantages of fast track or expedited review and all of those other pieces, that is the cost of participation. And to me, when I read it the first time and then I read it again and read it a third time, inside I was just cheering because there was probably a group of moms or rare disease families that had advocated from every level and maybe for years to get that point heard. Because my hope is that everything we have learned and everything we are doing now can be applied in the future in many regions of the world that, to Deb's point, have been neglected up till now. And that's real diversity. And that all of us can participate in trials. That's where the answers will come. So let's peer a bit into the future. We have a few minutes. Given what we have seen and are seeing, what is your hope for the coming future? Craig, specifically for you, I know it's an area of great interest and attention for you. Is the promise of AI and emerging technology going to provide that groundswell that meets patient and sponsor expectation?
Certainly, there's a lot of great opportunities for artificial intelligence across clinical development, whether it's around study design and planning, whether it's generative AI for regulatory document creation, whether it's around predictive analytics to help us improve quality and oversight, whether it's around our data processes, automating them or helping to streamline and bring more real world data into our trials and mapping the complexity of that data, all the way through to those use cases we see for digital twins and synthetic data in studies. I think, to me, as we're looking at decentralized right now, a few themes around AI pop out. One is that ability to pull real world data and EHR data into our trials. There are a lot of approaches today that assume that the investigator's EHR is the one from which we want to pull data into my study. As we increase the distance between the patient and the investigator, the probability that it's the investigator's EHR that knows anything about me decreases. The source that you'll have to go through to get true EHR data about me is me, and my ability to give permission to connect with different data sources for the places where I obtain care. And AI is going to become an important part of how we normalize and map and bring all of that data together. But I think as we think about our future state, a lot of it, and I think you hit on this a little bit earlier, Ellen and Deb, is going to be about creating options and choice and flexibility for our participants. And there's a role for AI there as well, because for us today to try to create options and choice for patients may mean standing up a lot of resources and infrastructure that we're not actually going to need, because we can't have 5 options available for every patient waiting for them to click a button. But think about how Amazon knows that I'm about to order batteries, and they have AAA batteries at a depot closest to my house with my name on the package, just waiting for me to click the button, right? Predictive analytics that understand and can anticipate. And I think we need that level of intelligence in our trials to better understand patient journeys and be able to help us to plan our resources and make better predictions of where certain decentralized methods will be needed to create true options and choice for patients in our trials.
Thank you. I know this is an area where you spend a considerable amount of your time these days, and I'm fascinated to learn you've thought much more deeply into it than certainly I did. Deb, did you have any thoughts on AI, or is that something that's outside your day-to-day at this point?
It's not actually outside, because what Craig brought up, I think, is the criticality of collecting data as it's coming from, as he said, himself, the patient. There is no interpreter, if you will, who could be the person entering data at the site, who's reading the notes and then putting information into the CRF. We want to be able to have visits at home, at school, at work, where, again, we're taking that patient verbatim information, putting it right into the database. That way, to me, it's going to close the gap by how shall I say, uncomfortable feelings that people in the clinical world have about doing things not right in their clinic. So if we are able to go to somebody's house or somebody's work and do an infusion, and the PI is able to join that visit via telemedicine, via virtual reality, check in with the patient while the infusion is going or while the assessment is going, won't that just bring a era of trust into, okay, yeah, this sounds really good, but I'm a little nervous about it, to, hey, I've seen it working in the home with my patients. My patients are happy with it. I'm happy with the nursing care that's being provided. So that's where I hope we're going in the future.
Great. Well, I appreciate that you two could join today in a review of how we got to this point and your hopes and visions for our future. So I'm going to reach into the box that holds questions. And there's one here, the first question that we took in that I'm finding really interesting. So why don't we go there? And this is, how aligned should a sponsor consider the strategies to advance home health and mobile visits with alternative visits? And by this, defined here as large networked integrated pharmacies, naive healthcare convert to research sites. Are they disparate tracks, or is there more power to merge these concepts? What a fantastic question.
It's a great question.
That's a great question. Deb, why don't you dive in
Yeah,
first?
I saw the question pop up, and right away, that's was my life every day, right? You have all of these different types of choices. How do we merge this together so that we are not creating separate processes or separate types of documentation or separate types of technology for each type? It should all try to fit the need of the trial, fit the need of the patient. So if you're talking about large pharmacy type sites where potentially patients can come and participate in a clinical trial, that may work for certain disease states, but then it may not work for others. So how do we take what we've learned so far to make sure that we offer, and it's going to take mistakes again, right? We're going to make mistakes again, or lessons learned again of, okay, this worked really well for this type of trial, this type of disease type, this type of patient, this type of culture, this type of diversity, and this one didn't. Why? We need to include the patients, not just the sites, include the patients in their thoughts before, during, and after while we're doing these decentralized elements, so that we can most effectively decide, okay, this for this trial will be the best way to go. I think it's still a work in progress, to be honest, from a sponsor perspective.
Craig, do you have thoughts, because you've had a ringside seat to all of the players working together well, sometimes not so well other times? What is your vision for the community-based and the home-based model, and do they play nice?
There is definitely the need to have an integrated strategy within your organization as you're thinking about the tools and opportunities to improve access for your trial. And whether that means home health, whether that means pharmacy, whether that means pop-up or mobile sites, whether that means integrated research organizations, IROs that may be helping to power research naive investigators in your study. These have to be fit for purpose for your different trials. And I think one reason that, and to Deb's point, right, we don't want divergent approaches, divergent strategies, divergent documentation, but we also have to not, throw out baby in bathwater sometimes. And what I mean by that is, remember, the core question is, who's the investigator and what are the competencies of the investigator in my trial, right? So there may be some studies that have certain complexity that you need an experienced investigator, but you can complement them with resources like visiting nurses or home health, as compared with other instances where you may be able to accommodate a more research naive investigator given the nature of that protocol, or be able to accommodate certain other models within pharmacy. And so while it's important to have an integrated strategy, it's important to then parse out which of those tools, levers, and approaches are going to be right for a particular study, and not make sweeping generalizations that my study looks like X, and therefore I can't use any of these approaches. We bundle them together for simplicity and because they fit together strategically, but they're different tools that we can pull out for different protocols in different situations.
Agreed.
Well said.
It's a new world, and we're all figuring this out, and we're scaling. And certainly, we have watched with attention as the community-based model has grown and matured. And I think they are making huge progress very quickly. But at PCM, our position is, and likely will remain, that for some patients, even getting across the street is a major burden, and that service at the bedside or at the kitchen table, as we like to say, is an accommodation that should be offered to those patients who are fragile, immobile, and challenged in so many ways. And of course, the privacy angle, which isn't talked about very much, but I think will become increasingly important in our degenerative disease pursuit of treatment. So thank you for your perspectives. I have one last question before we wrap up. Are you convinced that DCT is going to stand the test of time? And if yes, and I think our answer is among the three of us a wholehearted yes, we've invested a lot of our lives into it. What is the one thing you wish every patient considering a trial be offered? Or what should they feel when they are offered a trial? I can begin by saying my wish would be that that patient has a thoughtful recognition that themselves and their family have been seen and are genuinely at the center of the effort, the collective effort of this family, their physicians, their investigator, their sponsor, their everything, that they are truly at the center. That would be the one wish that I have. Craig, what's yours?
So when I think about, where things are going forward, one thing I keep in mind is this is not just all about industry and whether pharma companies will continue to adopt or not. For one thing, academic researchers are taking the ball right now and taking the lead. And some of the studies that our investigators themselves are designing and implementing go far beyond what anyone in pharma could envision getting done in a clinical trial with an investigational medicine. And so while there are a lot of factors making it harder for pharma and biotech today because of the economic climate in which they're operating, that doesn't mean that all progress with decentralized is stalled. It means the baton is shifted from pharma during the heat of the pandemic over to academic researchers to continue to stress and challenge and really define next generation approaches. But as long as we have regulatory clarity and we're listening to patients when we're planning and designing our studies, these models will persevere. It's hard for me to imagine a future state where anyone is following through in living the rhetoric of patient centricity, and listening to patients when they're designing their studies, and hearing the challenges of burden and access, and think, I shouldn't implement these. Right? So as long as we have that regulatory clarity and operating confidence that we're building, these methods will persevere and outlast the current, slump some people may feel that some in industry are going through right now.
Thank you. And Deb, your thoughts to close us off.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm aligned with what the both of you said. I think for me, loud and clear, whether you're academic, whether you're an integrative research group, whether you're a sponsor, whatever it is, listen to the patients. I learned early in clinical trials that the diseases these patients have, these people are well networked and connected amongst each other. So if you have disease A and you get on, especially nowadays with all types of social media where you can connect with other patients that are joining this trial or that trial, what do you need to be able to participate in a trial that may potentially help you with your quality of life and treatment of a disease that you may have. And Ellen brought up rare and orphan, but I'll say from the beginning, I've been all about hematology and oncology. I see those patients, they deserve the dignity to say, I want to be able to do this and participate in your clinical trial. Can you fit this in? Will this work for you? So that it's, I think, yes, DCT absolutely going to continue. But again, I think the voices of the patients and the voices of the clinicians need to be aligned and heard so that the modes of different elements that we are all using become more fruitful instead of not worth the while, didn't really help anybody out.
Well, thank you. To our attendees, join me in thanking these wonderful and experienced experts, Craig Lipsett, Deb Guattari. You will receive an email if you attended telling you how to access the on-demand version of this webinar. And you can access this through the website at www.arena-international.com. You can also ask questions that will get back filtered to us. We look forward to sharing further webinars with you, so please do keep an eye on the website, as I mentioned. And thank you for your time and your attention and your interest in serving patients. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Have a great day, evening, depending where you are.